Good morning, students. Today we will read the story The Happy Prince. The story has been written by Oscar Wilde. Now, Oscar Wilde is a popular man of letters in English literature. The Happy Prince and Selfish Giant are the most celebrating stories in English literature. The story, The Happy Prince, brings out the great idea that love and concern for the poor and the miserable people is the greatest service which is blessed by God. Written by Oscar Wilde, the story touches the deepest core of our hearts. This is the story of the statue of a happy prince and a little swallow. The Happy Prince was a beautiful statue that stood on tall pedestal high above the city. The statue was covered by thin layers of gold. He had sapphires for his eyes and a ruby in his sword. One night, a little swallow flew over the city. He was tired and wanted to spend the night between the feet of the Happy Prince. As he was ready to sleep, just then a large drop of water fell on him. The swallow was curious as the sky was clear. The swallow understood that it was the tears of the prince. He asked him the reason. The prince told him about the misery around him. The swallow made up his mind to stay there and help the poor. The happy prince gave a ruby for a poor seamstress. He gave a sapphire for a playwright and another sapphire for a match girl. The swallow carried out the commands of the prince. Now the prince was totally blind. The happy prince asked the swallow to fly away to Egypt, but the swallow decided to stay with the blind prince forever. The swallow reported about the sufferings of the people, and at the command of the happy prince, he plucked out the gold leaves from the statue and gave him to the poor. The statue now had become dull and grey. The frost made the swallow colder and colder, and he was about to die. He flew to the happy prince, who bade him goodbye to go to Egypt. The bird said that he is leaving for the house of death and fell down at the feet of the prince. Just then, the leaden heart of the prince cracked into two parts because of the frost. Next morning, the mayor ordered the statue to be taken down as it does not look attractive anymore. The statue was ordered to be melted in the furnace. The broken lead heart, however, did not melt, so it was thrown on a heap of dust beside the dead bird, which was also lying there. In heaven, God asked one of the angels to bring him the most precious things from the city. The angel carried away the broken heart and the dead bird. God praised him for his choice. He said to the angel, "You have rightly chosen, For in my garden in paradise, this little bird shall sing forever. And in my city of gold, the happy prince shall praise the Lord. So, children, this is the story about Happy Prince. So, the story teaches us that we should show compassion towards the needy and help them. Really, it has a fine moral, right? Good rewards those who feel for the poor and make sacrifices to remove miseries and sufferings of other people. The prince and the little swallow who helps him are rewarded in heaven for their kind deed on earth. So, students, this was the summary of the text. Let us read the text. The Happy Prince. High above the city, on a tall column, stood the statue of the Happy Prince. He was gilded all over with thin leaves of fine gold. For eyes, he had two bright sapphires, and a large red ruby glowed on his sword hilt. Underline the word gilded. It means to cover with something or coating of something. And the word hilt means the handle of a weapon or tool, especially a sword, dagger, or knife. So, the statue of a prince stood on a high platform overlooking the city. This prince was called a happy prince because when he was alive, he always remained very happy. Upon his death, a big statue of his was erected in the center of the city in his remembrance. The statue of this happy prince was covered with thin layers of gold, and instead of eyeballs, there were two bright, shining sapphire stones. In the handle of his sword, a bright ruby stone was placed. Next, one night there flew over the city a little swallow. His friends had gone away to Egypt 6 weeks before, but he had stayed behind. Then he decided to go to Egypt too. So, swallow is the name of a bird. It is a tiny bird. Although it is not a human being, still the writer is referring to it as he and his. He says that all his friends of this swallow had flown away to Egypt 6 weeks ago. This bird did not go with them, but later it thought of going to Egypt to his friends. So it was on its way to Egypt. Next, all day long he flew, and at night time he arrived at the city. Where shall I put up? He said. I hope the town has made preparations. Put up means where to live for the night. So the bird, the swallow, kept on flying on its way to Egypt, and at night it reached the city of Happy Prince. It wanted to stay somewhere for the night. It thinks upon where to stay at night. The bird says that hopefully the city has made some arrangements for it to stay. Obviously, the bird does not mean what it is saying. We can say that probably the bird is being humorous, right? Next. Then he saw the statue on the tall column. I will put up there, he cried. It's a fine position with plenty of fresh air. So he alighted just between the feet of the happy prince. Alighted means descended. So now when this tiny bird saw this huge statue of the happy prince, it thought of staying there for the night. So the bird thought that it was a good place to spend the night there. There was a shelter and lot of fresh air. So the bird came and alighted. It stopped and sat in between the feet of the statue of Happy Prince. Next, I have a golden bedroom, he said softly to himself. As he looked around and he prepared to go to sleep, but just as he was putting his day head under his wing, a large drop of water fell on him. What a curious thing, he cried. There is not a single cloud in the sky. The stars are quite clear and bright, and yet it is raining. Then another drop fell. So, when the bird sat in between the feet of the happy prince, it was surrounded with gold. So, it thought that it had a bedroom made of gold because it was surrounded by gold all around. As it was about to sleep, as it was putting its head under the wing, suddenly a large drop of water fell on it. The bird was surprised because all of a sudden a drop of water fell on it. It thought that neither was it raining nor the rainy season was going on. The swallow could not believe this because the sky was not cloudy and stars were shining. Just then, another drop of water fell on it. So, the bird is now thinking, from where the waters are coming, right? Okay, next. What is the use of a statue if it cannot keep the rain off? He said. I must look for a good chimney pot. And he determined to fly away. So, the swallow thought that the statue was useless because it was not able to protect it from the rain. So, he thought he should not sleep under the statue. The swallow thought that it was better if it took shelter in a chimney of a house and thought to move away from there because the statue was not able to protect him from the rain. Next, but before he had opened his wings, a third drop fell and he looked up and saw, what did he see? So, before the bird flew away, when the third drop of water fell on him and he looked up, he saw what? What did he see? Let's find out. The eyes of the happy prince were filled with tears, and tears were running down his golden cheeks. So, the bird discovered that it was the tears of the happy prince. The eyes of the happy prince's statue were filled with tears. These drops of water were the teardrops falling off the statue's golden cheeks. His face was so beautiful in the moonlight that the little swallow was filled with pity. Who are you? He said. I am the happy prince. So, the bird was curious. It was thinking that such a huge golden statue is crying. So, he was surprised. And so, he asked the happy prince, what is the reason? And who is he? So, the statue replied that it was the happy prince. Next, why are you weeping then? Asked the swallow. You have quite drenched me. Drenched means soaked with water, right? So, The swallow thought that the statue was of the happy prince. Now, the name is Happy Prince. Still the prince is crying? So, what is the matter? The bird asked the statue that why it was crying. It added that it had soaked it with its tears. When I was alive and had a human heart, answered the statue, I did not know what tears were, for I lived in the palace where sorrow is not allowed to enter. My courtiers called me the happy prince, and happy indeed I was. So I lived and so I died, and now that I am dead, they have set me up here so high that I can see the ugliness and all the misery of my city. And though my heart is made of lead, yet I cannot choose but weep. So the happy prince narrated his story to the swallow. The happy prince said that when he was alive and he had a human heart means the heart which beats is alive. At that time, he was not aware what tears were and what sorrow was, as he lived in a palace where there was happiness all around. All the people who used to work in his court used to call him Happy Prince because he used to be happy all the time and he had not seen sorrow at all. And he said that he lived happily and died in happiness only. When he had a human heart, he never cried. He was not aware what tears were because he had seen happiness only and never faced any sorrow. Now, when he was dead, they had put him so high in the form of a statue on a pedestal that he could see the whole city and the ugliness of the city. He could see that there were so many people living in misery, lack of food, hunger, money, homelessness. Now, when the statue's heart was made of lead, a metal, although it did not have any feelings, then also when it saw all the sadness, it became sad and wept. Next, what? Is it not solid gold? Said the swallow to himself. He was too polite to make any personal remarks. So, when the happy prince was telling his sad story, the swallow was thinking about something else in his mind. The bird wondered that the statue of the prince was not made of solid gold. It was surprised. It thought that from outside the statue was covered with gold. But as it said that the heart was made of lead and not of gold, it realized that it was the hollow and it was not made of solid gold. It saw that the statue was very sad and was crying. So, he did not make any personal remarks. It did not comment anything about the statue because it was giving the value to the statue's feelings. Right? Next. Far away, continued the statue in a low musical voice. Far away, in a little street, there is a poor house. One of the windows is open, and through it I can see a woman seated at a table. Her face is thin and worn, and she has coarse red hands, all pricked by the needle, for she is a seamstress, meaning woman who makes a living by sewing. So the statue now continued its story. It spoke in a very musical voice that far away there was a house of a poor woman. The window of her house was open and it could see through the window that she was sitting near the table. Her face was thin and she was tired. Her hands were rough and had become red because they had been pricked by the needle. The woman was a seamstress. Right? So what can the prince see? The prince can see the misery of the seamstress. Next, she is embroidering flowers on a satin gown for the loveliest of the queen's maids of honor to wear at the next court ball. In a bed in the corner of the room, her little boy is lying ill. He has a fever and is asking his mother to give him oranges. His mother has nothing to give him but river water. So he is crying, "Swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you not bring her the ruby out of my shirt hilt? My feet are fastened to this pedestal and I cannot move." So, here we can see that the prince is making a request to the swallow. What is the request? To give the ruby from the handle of its sword to the lady, as his boy, his child has a fever and he wants to eat orange and the lady does not have any money to buy him so. Right? So the prince wants the little swallow to give him the ruby to the lady. "I am waited for in Egypt," said the swallow. "My friends are flying up and down the Nile and taking to the large lotus flowers. Soon they will go to sleep." So at this, the swallow replied that it had to go to Egypt. Its friends were waiting for it. The swallow said that its friends were in Egypt. They were flying near the Nile river and taking to the large lotus flowers, which grows there. That means here the swallow is trying to tell the prince that he will not be able to do so because he needs to take rest, because the next day he needs to fly away to Egypt. Right? Next, the prince asks the swallow to stay with him for one night and be his messenger. "The boy is so thirsty and the mother so sad," he said. So the statue requested the swallow to stay with him for one night and asked him to be his messenger and work on his behalf. Right? At this, let us see what is the swallow saying. "I don't think I like boys," answered the swallow. "I want to go to Egypt." Now again the swallow is saying that he does not want to do such a thing, as he needs to go to Egypt. But the happy prince looked so sad that the little swallow was sorry. "It is very cold here," he said, but he agreed to stay with him for one night and be his messenger. "Thank you, little swallow," said the prince. So, when the swallow said that he will not be able to work on his behalf, the prince became so sad that the little swallow took pity on him and he agreed to stay there for one night and to work on his behalf. At this, the prince became happy again and he said, "Thank you, little swallow." Next, the swallow picked out the great ruby from the prince's shirt and flew away with it in his beak over the roofs of the town. He passed by the cathedral tower where the white marble angels were sculptured. He passed by the palace and heard the sound of dancing. A beautiful girl came out on the balcony with her lover. "I hope my dress will be ready in time for the state ball," she said. "I have ordered flowers to be embroidered on it, but the seamstresses are so lazy." So, when the swallow was crossing over the palace to go to the seamstress, she heard what the lady was talking about the same gown on which that lady was doing embroidering, to whom the bird had to give the ruby stone. When the swallow flew over the river, ships also came along the way. Lanterns were hanging on their sails. Finally, the swallow reached the woman's house. The boy was tossing feverishly on his bed, and the mother had fallen asleep. She was so tired. He hoped and laid the great ruby on the table beside the woman's thimble. A thimble means a metal or plastic cap with a closed end, worn to protect the finger and push the needle in sewing. So, the swallow put the ruby stone on the table near the thimble. Then he flew gently round the bed, fanning the boy's forehead with his wings. "How cool I feel," said the boy. "I must be getting better." And he sank into a delicious slumber. That means he slept. Then the swallow flew back to the happy prince and told him what he had done. "It is curious," he remarked, "but I feel quite warm now, although it is so cold." So, after doing such a good work, now the bird is feeling good. He is feeling little warm, even though the weather was very cold. Next, "This is because you have done a good action," said the prince. Now, what is the prince saying? The prince is saying that you are feeling good, you are feeling warm because you have done a good deed. And what was the good deed? That he helped someone. Right? Next. And the little swallow began to think and then fell asleep. Thinking always made him sleepy. When day broke, he flew down to the river and had a bath. "Tonight I go to Egypt," said the swallow, and he was in high spirits at the prospect. That means thought of something. What was his thought? His thought was that he wants to reach Egypt as soon as possible. He visited all the monuments and sat a long time on top of a church steeple. Steeple means high tower of the church. So the swallow bird visited all the monuments of the city, and finally he went and sat on the high tower of the church. When the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. "Have you any commissions for Egypt?" he cried. "I am just starting." When it was just trying to go for Egypt, when he was trying to take permission from the prince to leave for Egypt, the prince said, "Swallow, swallow, little swallow, will you stay with me one night longer?" "I am waited for in Egypt," answered the swallow. "Swallow, swallow, little swallow," said the prince, "far away across the city I see a young man in a garret. He is leaning over a desk covered with papers, and in the glass by his side there is a bunch of withered violets." So now the happy prince is telling the swallow to stay for one more night and work on his behalf. He says that far away he can see a young man sitting on a desk on which the papers were spread all over, and he was trying to work hard. He had a glass lying near him in which withered flowers were lying. His hair is brown and crisp. His lips are red as a pomegranate, and he has large and dreamy eyes. Further, the happy prince gave a description of that boy. He said that his hair was brown and how he looks like. So let us see, what does the prince now want? Now the happy prince wants the swallow to give the boy a ruby. Now, why does the prince want to give the boy a ruby? Because The boy needed to finish writing a play. He was a writer and he had to give the play to the director after writing. But he did not have strength to write any more because he was feeling very cold. The boy had no money, so that's why there was no fire in his fireplace and he was very hungry. Also, due to which he was feeling very weak. Next, I will wait with you one night longer, said the swallow, who really had a good heart. He asked if he should take another ruby to the young playwright. Alas, I have no ruby now, said the prince. So the prince said that it was very sad that he did not have any more ruby stones with him. My eyes are all that I have left. They are made of rare sapphires, which were brought out of India 1,000 years ago. He ordered the swallow to pluck out one of them and take it to the playwright. He will sell it to the jeweler and buy firewood and finish his play, he said. The swallow was very sad to learn that the happy prince wanted to give his eyes to that boy and he started crying. He told happy prince that he could not do so. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince. Do as I command you. So at this, the prince was saying that please do what you are asked to do, what you are commanded to do. But then the happy prince ordered the swallow to do what he had told him to do. And the bird finally did that. Next, I am beginning to be appreciated, he cried. This is from some great admirer. Now I can finish my play. And he looked quite happy. So after getting it, the boy became very happy. The next day the swallow flew down to the harbor. He sat on the mast of a large vessel and watched the sailor working. I am going to Egypt, cried the swallow, but nobody minded. And when the moon rose, he flew back to the happy prince. I have come to bid you goodbye, he cried. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, will you not stay with me one night longer? Now again the happy prince requested the swallow to stay with him for one more night. It is winter, answered the swallow, and the snow will soon be here. In Egypt the sun is warm on the green palm trees, and the crocodiles lie in the mud and look lazily about them. In the square below, said the happy prince, there stands a little match girl. She has let her matches fall in the gutter, and they are all spoiled. Her father will beat her if she does not bring home some money, and she is crying. She has no shoes or stockings, and her little head is bare. Pluck out my other eye and give it to her, and her father will not beat her. So now the prince wants to give another sapphire from his eyes to the little match girl, so that her father did not beat her. Next, I will stay with you one night longer, said the swallow, but I cannot pluck out your eye. You would be quite blind then. Swallow, swallow, little swallow, said the prince, do as I command you. So finally the swallow obeyed the happy prince's order. He took another sapphire stone from his eye and flew to the little match girl, and when he saw the match girl, he bent very low and kept the sapphire stone on the little girl's hand. The little girl was very happy to see the stone, and she went home happily. Then the swallow came back to the prince. You are blind now, he said, so I will stay with you always. So, after giving the sapphire to the little match girl, the swallow returned back to the prince and told him that now as he was blind, so he would stay with him forever. No, little swallow, said the poor prince, You must go away to Egypt. No, I will stay with you always, said the swallow, and he slept at the prince's feet. All the next day he sat on the prince's shoulder and told him stories of what he had seen in strange lands. So now the swallow will tell the happy prince what was going around him in the city. Next, dear little swallow, said the prince, you tell me of marvelous things, but more marvelous than anything is the suffering of men and women. There is no mystery so great as misery. Fly over my city, little swallow, and tell me what you see there. So the swallow flew over the great city and saw the rich making merry in their beautiful houses, while the beggars were sitting at the gates. He flew into the dark lanes and saw the white faces of the starving children looking out listlessly at the black streets. Under the archway of a bridge, two little boys were lying in each other's arms to try and keep themselves warm. How hungry we are, they said. You must not lie here, shouted the watchman, and they wandered out into the rain. So, we can see that when the bird went around the city, it can see the misery of the city. And it made the bird quite sad. When Swallow again went back to Happy Prince and told him what he had seen in the city, let us see what did the Happy Prince reply. I am covered with fine gold, said the prince. You must take it off, leaf by leaf, and give it to the poor. The living always think that gold can make them happy. Leaf after leaf of the fine gold the swallow picked off, till the Happy Prince looked quite dull and grey. So, as the Happy Prince commanded, the swallow did so. He took out all the gold layers from the statue of Happy Prince, and when all the layers of the gold are removed, the Happy Prince's statue started looking dull and grey. Next, then the snow came, and after the snow came the frost. The streets looked as if they were made of silver. Everybody went about in furs, and the little boys wore scarlet caps and skated on the ice. The poor little swallow grew colder and colder, but he would not leave the prince. He loved him too well. Swallowbird was feeling very cold. He kept on sitting near the Happy Prince's statue. Why? Because he loved the Happy Prince. Why? Because of his generosity. He picked up crumbs outside the baker's door when the baker was not looking and tried to keep himself warm by flapping his wings. But at last he knew that he was going to die. He had just enough strength to fly up to the prince's shoulder once more. Goodbye, dear prince, he murmured. Will you let me kiss your hand? Now when the swallow is about to die, he says to the Happy Prince that, can I kiss your hand? I am glad that you are going to Egypt at last, little swallow, said the prince. So now when the swallow wants to kiss the hand of the Happy Prince thought that finally the swallow wanted to go to Egypt. You have stayed too long here, but you must kiss me on the lips, for I love you. It is not to Egypt that I am going, said the swallow. I am going to the house of death. Death is the brother of sleep, is he not? At that moment, a curious crack sounded inside the statue, as if something had broken. The fact is that the laden heart had snapped right in two. It certainly was a dreadfully hard frost. So, when the swallow wanted to bid bye to the happy prince because he understood that he is going to die, at the same time, the laden heart of the happy prince broke into two pieces. Early the next morning, the mayor was walking in the square below in company with the town councillors. As they passed the column, he looked up at the statue. "Dear me, how shabby the happy prince looks," he said. Shabby means untidy. "How shabby indeed," cried the town councillors, who always agreed with the mayor, and they went up to look at it. "The ruby has fallen out of his shirt. His eyes are gone, and he is golden no longer," said the mayor. "In fact, he is little better than a beggar." "Little better than a beggar," said the town councillors. So, here we can see that whatever the mayor is saying, the town councillor kept on repeating it. Right? So that the mayor thinks the town councillor to be his favorite person. Next, "And here is actually a dead bird at his feet," continued the mayor. "We must really issue a proclamation that birds are not to be allowed to die here." And the town clerk made a note of the suggestion. So, when they saw the little bird dead there on the feet of the statue, he told the town councillors to pass an order that the birds were not allowed to die on the feet of the statue, and the town clerk made a note of the suggestion given by him. So we can see how heartless these people are. They are not sad at all at the death of the little bird. So they pulled down the statue of the happy prince, as he is no longer beautiful, he is no longer useful, said the art professor at the university. Then they melted the statue in a furnace. Furnace means a fireplace where metals are melted. So they melted the statue, which was made of lead, in a furnace. "What a strange thing," said the overseer of the workmen of the foundry. Foundry means workshop, where casting of metal is done. Now what is the strange thing? This broken lead heart will not melt in the furnace. We must throw it away. So we have seen that the broken heart, which is broken in two pieces, was not melting in the furnace. So they threw it on a dust heap where the dead swallow was lying. So it is a matter of coincidence that where the heart of the happy prince were thrown, in the same place the dead swallow was lying. "Bring me the two most precious things in the city," said the god to one of his angels. And the angel brought him the laden heart and the dead bird. God asked one of his angels to bring him the two most precious things of the city. The angel brought the two pieces of the heart of the statue and the dead swallow bird. "You have rightly chosen," said God, "for in my garden of paradise this little bird shall sing forevermore, and in my city of gold the happy prince shall praise me." So, as the angel brought the right thing, the two pieces of the heart of the statue and the dead swallow bird, the god was extremely happy. He told the angel that he had chosen the right things. These two things were really the most precious things of the city. He said that the bird would always sing in the garden of his paradise, and the happy prince would stay in his city of gold and admire them. So students, this is the story of Happy Prince. So now again you go through the chapter and try to write down the answers of the questions given in your book. Okay students, thank you. Have a nice day.